Motion to approve.
I'll second.
It's a motion from Cundy, a second from Vukanich. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Next agenda item, new business. The first new business item is a council-directed review of city code regarding private garages. I'll turn it over to Clara Beck for a summary of staff memo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will provide just some anecdotal context, I suppose, for this request. Before my outreach from Mr. Layton, who is a council member, I had actually received a phone call from this, he's not the landowner, but his family member owns the land, but the person who's interested in building a garage on a standalone lot, which is the reason that we're here discussing this tonight, he basically was interested in building a garage that would not have any kind of dwelling unit associated with it. It would simply be a garage slash workshop, I suppose. He didn't elaborate on that further, but the use would be just as storage or workshop space on a property in an R1 zone. So when I talked to him on the phone, the options that I gave him were, well, you can find a primary use and you can build it to include a primary use or be adjacent to a primary use, or you can talk to your council members about making a zoning change, because he wasn't happy with the response that he was getting based on the fact that it was simply a garage not including some sort of primary use. So that is the direction that he ended up going. He contacted council member Layton, who sent an email to the city administrator to get some further information on the zoning code and why this constituent was getting the response that he was getting. And then he brought that request to the council to have the planning commission review code and potentially suggest a change. So that is where we are tonight. I've included the email from Councilmember Layton in the response that I sent him and the full council that just sort of walks through our the zoning that we have currently and the response that the constituent got. And then I think I can't remember what I said in my memo, but I think I laid out some next steps for us so we could continue to leave code the way that it is and require some sort of a primary use, or we could maybe introduce some kind of a conditional use permit process, or we could look at changing code completely and redefining garage or accessory structure so that it could be a standalone on a residential lot. I do think we should restrict our conversations to residential zones. I don't know that this needs to get beyond that at this point, but I am always open for discussion on that as well. So that is where we are, and I'm interested to see what you guys think about this and what direction you'd like to go.
Thank you. Open it up for discussion.
Is this really an adjacent lot, or is it a lot across the street?
Neither. It is, I believe, the person who's interested in building the lot lives near his mother. The lot is neither adjacent to his home nor his mother's home. I believe they're on they're at least a block away.
Got it.
Had it been an adjacent lot, the response would have been, let's just combine your parcels. Therefore, it is one parcel, and then you have an accessory to your primary structure. Unfortunately, they are not adjacent, so that wasn't an option.
Yeah, I mean, it's an opportunity for the city, I think, to probably roll back some regulations that were placed here, looks like maybe back in like 65. I think it's an opportunity for individuals to probably invest in some blighted properties around town that maybe wouldn't be worth the investment of a new primary residence in there. So right now that essentially falls onto the city to take these blighted properties when they default on taxes, which can take several years, and then clean up the lot and then try to sell the lot, hopefully recoup their money. Anybody that's building spec homes or investing in real estate isn't gonna set $350,000, $400,000 into a 75-foot wide lot. Just doesn't make good sense. So, you know, I could really care less whether the lot is adjacent, near, across town, whatever it may be. I think it's an opportunity to spark some investment into our community. I'd rather have a new garage sitting next to me than a rundown house that's 85 years old. So, lived in a couple other communities that were pretty progressive on this as well, had some pretty good success. One of them was Watertown, South Dakota. I think I had Clara forward on some of the ordinance language there, but seems like a pretty fair and easy process to go through to get it rezoned as an RG, so adjacent to a residential zone for a garage. Basically takes a majority of the neighboring property owners to sign off on that before it would even be considered. Put some building restrictions as part of that too, just to make sure you're not building like a 20-foot sidewall. A lot of it has to do with, you know, casting shadows, stuff like that on your neighbor's property. You know, I thought it was probably a pretty good baseline to start with, if the planning commission is open to that.
So just to clarify, your proposal would be to, and that's what this in front of us is
Correct.
an example of setting up a new zoning,
Correct, yes.
not redefining the current, what a residence is or,
Yeah, we would add another zoning code to our city charter, or city code, whatever that may be, yeah.
Mr. Cooney, appreciate you going and getting that Watertown example. It's nice to see how another community's doing it. Just for discussion, would establishing a new zoning category be preferable to establishing a conditional use permit process that is fairly easy to navigate? 'Cause the one thing that is interesting with the Watertown example is, you know, you would be responsible for collecting signatures from your neighborhood, which seems like it could potentially be an uncomfortable process. And, you know, you're now letting your neighbors dictate or potentially dictate what you could and couldn't do. So I don't know, just what's the thoughts on a new zoning versus just a conditional use permit process?
So just from like a very basic, if you're gonna do an application for one of those two things, it is a cheaper and quicker process to have a conditional use permit in place. That said, I did call Watertown, South Dakota, just to talk through how they've made this work, what is working, what maybe isn't working. And interestingly, as of February, they actually got rid of the requirement that you get neighbor buy-in, because that was literally just stopping it in its
Yeah.
tracks almost every time. And they introduced, and I set this on your desks before the meeting, a new residential zone that's residential storage. So residential garage, the way that the woman on the phone explained it to me, was more for like a commercial use near, they have a lake. It would be near the lake district, so it was pretty large lots that they'd have big garages on for housing boats, etc. The residential storage is meant to be a little bit smaller, a little less commercial use, so more like a neighborhood use sort of garage style like that. It allows for smaller lot sizes, and it does not have the requirement that they get buy-in from the neighbors. It's just if the rezone is allowed, then that's by right the use is a garage or a storage unit essentially. So yeah, whether or not conditional use permit versus rezone is easier or harder.
Well, with the rezone, I mean, we could essentially apply that to an entire district, and applicants wouldn't have to come into or in front of the planning commission or file a conditional use or wait. They would just simply have to apply for a building permit if we were to go that route.
So you're thinking maybe like an overlay.
Yes.
Okay.
My concern about this is, and maybe Wayne, you can talk a little bit more to it too, is that our city is only so big, right? We have a limited amount of real estate in our city to develop for housing purposes, for residential purposes. And when we look at the kind of the boundaries of the city, there's not a lot of room to further develop, from what I can see, like beyond what our current boundaries are, unless we want to take over agricultural land, which obviously is very high in value. So my concern would be with the housing issue that we have. If we allow for garages to be constructed on residential lots, that takes away from the available real estate that could be developed for residential purposes.
So I will just point out to that regard is that the city has multiple acreages that are zoned for residential development that has been a number of years that no action has been taken on them. Currently, the riverfront or the former dairy property can't even get a proposal on there for a developer. Not to mention, is it like close to 40 or 60 acres of the Norgren property on the north end of town that has also been plotted for residential development that nothing has been done on. So I understand where you're going with this, but garages here and there scattered throughout town on small lots, tearing down blighted houses. I mean, it still doesn't stop a developer from putting covenants on that property to stop a garage from being built in that area, right? If that's the concern. So,
Well, I think it would, though, stop a developer from putting covenants on, wouldn't it? Because if we're allowing this in whole districts, I mean, a developer couldn't come in and say, no, I don't want that, because it's allowed by the new zone, right?
Yeah,
If it,
I
if it
mean-
was a planned unit development or like a new subdivision, I believe they can place covenants like that, but then that is up to that neighborhood to continue enforcing those.
Okay.
The city doesn't enforce covenants on a neighborhood.
Yeah, it needs to be like one big parcel that ended up getting splitted up by that developer, and that developer was able to put covenants on each of those lots by virtue of it having been on one common ownership.
So let's just say there was a development by the river or wherever for residential development, and the developer allowed that, the city allowed garages to be on certain ones. The thing that comes to mind for me is water sewer, because there are assessments generally to each lot to spread out the cost of the project. So then, does it come cost prohibitive even for that to happen? Because we wouldn't allow, I would assume, water and sewer to a garage.
Why?
Well, because then it becomes that opportunity to become a residential dwelling.
I disagree. I think we'd allow water and sewer. I mean, if you're gonna have it as a workshop, why wouldn't you wanna at least have a garden hose?
Yeah. And
Sink.
I'm not saying it's totally out of the realm of possibilities, other than this is a way bigger discussion if that is the case. Because in his email that he presented, he listed 5 things just in his own mind, if we're using that as an example of what he considered his garage to be.
Is Watertown using these zoning, are they using these as like, do they have specific areas that they have zoned? Like you said, they have a lake. So is there like an area where they've zoned, or are they using these as like spot zoning?
They're using it more as, so the way that, I don't think they necessarily intended for the residential garage zone to stay as contained around the lake as it did, but realistically, that is what happened based on the lot sizes. Well, and maybe they did intend that, and that's why they set the lot sizes the way that they did. But the residential storage is meant to be smaller in order to be able to pop up more in like a residential district. So, and I did ask about like, because I don't know all the rules in South Dakota. I said, do you have similar like concerns about spot zoning that we do in Minnesota, which is essentially you can't do it in Minnesota. And she said that they try to stay away from it, but she's not aware that it's like a legal issue. So they can do standalone zoning. She said they try to keep it in like and like together, but if it ends up being a standalone, that's mostly okay. So I guess I don't know necessarily how we would treat that here in Minnesota, where the state statute says no spot zoning. So I don't know if you can like create a district
What's,
be
can you,
exempt from
like,
that?
how do you define spot zoning?
Like it's a new zone. Well, maybe that's where the question comes in of an overlay district versus a brand new zoning district. But basically, a spot zone is when you have a zoning use that is specific to the use of that property. So you're zoning it so that it can be used in a very specific way, and it's not adjacent to that zoning anywhere else. I think a garage would not be an egregious example of spot zoning, but like a manufacturer who wants to come to town and they decide that the right place to manufacture is in the parking lot of Service Food, and we're like, all right, well then you can be zoned
Yep.
industrial right there, that would be spot zoning. I'm not a city planner, so this is just, that is my own research.
It seems like what I'm hearing is, on the one hand, Mr. Cooney's saying, what barriers can we remove to encourage progress and development? And then on the other hand, Ms. Duffy's saying, yeah, but we also want to try to ensure the highest and best use of our city property. So I think we have to figure out how do we balance those two, right? What about a conditional use permit process where you take them on a case-by-case basis?
I mean, this isn't a great reason not to do that, but I know that the city council just would prefer to have the least amount of conditional, just from an administrative
Yeah.
standpoint, and kind of bogging down their hearings and things like that.
Well,
You know,
I
it's like
think
they
for
come in front of us
consistency, I
once
think,
and then they
yeah.
go in front of the city and everyone says the same thing. The overlay district is kind of what had come to mind, you know, for me, right? And then I think that overlay district would be somewhat compatible or overlapping with all of the residential areas that we're talking about. And then that overlay district just describes the criteria in which you could, you know, build a garage on a vacant lot or a dilapidated lot, a house that gets torn down and turned into a vacant lot. You know, I think there's some question about, you know, what had come to mind for me, right, is that if I live on the north side of town and for whatever reason, I just feel like I need to have a garage on a $10,000 lot, which isn't a very bad value proposition. That's pretty doable, right? So I find a lot on the south side of town. I put a garage there. That's too expensive 50 years from now to want to tear down, but I've forever tied up that lot, it goes to Sarah's point, with a garage that can never really be, you know, habitable. I mean, no one would really live there. It would probably have some of the, you know, the utility hookups. You could build off of that, but my mind had gone to, would you even try to restrict where on the lot that the garage can be built to still leave, for example, 2/3 of the lot for a primary residence?
Interesting.
Just a thought.
So that's, I get that example, but let's just say you did buy the lot, there's no guarantee that a primary residence is gonna get there. So, to me, I look at like, the alternative is it just sits vacant. Whether they invest in a garage or invest in a house, I don't care. Investment is investment. Leave it up to the people that wanna purchase the property.
Would
But-
we ever up the investment criteria to include utilities to the garage, a requirement that it's plumbed out in that way? right? Because then it could be built off of, it could be rededicated more easily.
If it's in, they'd have access to that at the curb stop in the boulevard, right? And that's any plotted lot in town that is served by city water sewer. So it's not up to the city to determine whether that's there or not. The city already did their job by getting it up to the curb stop. No matter if you were to build a new house or garage or whatever, it's still the property owner's responsibility to take it from the curb stop into the dwelling. So as far as like the investment side of it on the sanitary and the water, that's already been done by the city. Kind of circling back to the conditional use permit piece, like the conditional use permit is there because we would put conditions on it, right? So like what, they would come in, they'd file their, what is it, $120 for the permit?
$350.
So another $350 for a conditional use permit to come in here, say, hey, I'm gonna build a garage. And we'd say, okay, great. What conditions are you gonna put on it? And we'd say, what at that point?
I think we could look at some of the stuff that Watertown has done, which is no commercial, like you're not going to run a business
Yep.
out of it. That would probably be a good.
Right.
Size.
But what I'm saying is like,
Materials.
then why wouldn't we just make that part of a zoning district and make it applicable to everybody versus wasting their time and $350 to come in here knowing that it's just gonna be the boilerplate rubber stamp, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do, same thing as the next guy down the street, and it just creates more regulation, more red tape, and delays progress.
I don't think that us or the city council is going to struggle to find the method of how we want to get there. The biggest part of this discussion will end up being, what do we envision for our city, right? I mean, do you want lots to get used up for garages? Maybe they lie vacant, maybe there's some dilapidated homes for, a longer period of time. I mean, these are just thoughts that we need to consider, and this isn't necessarily at that point really a zoning or planning commission, very long, future outlook discussion. We can contribute to that, but I think we kind of need to know what do we want for our community?
That's a good question. Because we've looked at Watertown, South Dakota. I did call Alexandria and Moorhead just as communities who are nearby to see how they handle this. They do it the same way that we do it currently. So we're not out of.
Which is
like,
what, they don't allow it?
We just, it's an accessory structure or accessory use and no standalone.
Why has the city had an aversion to that to date? Other than that, it's just always been that way.
Accessory structures?
Just having I mean, I brought this up
Like on
at a meeting
standalone?
last year, but if you have a house that burns down and there's a garage, standalone garage, the city will ask that the garage also gets taken down, even though it's in completely fine condition. So the city has,
Yeah.
there's got to be a reason for that. I think it would be good to know when we may be reaching back a few administrations to figure that out.
Yeah, I'm not sure about I do know that that has occurred where somebody's house has burned down and they've been given a certain amount of time to either build a new primary structure on the lot or remove the garage, and the time elapsed to such a point that they were asked to remove the garage. I've been just like very tangentially part of conversations that code enforcement had been having a couple years ago about standalone garages, because they do exist. I mean, they are in the city. And I think it is down to housing stock and an issue that we have seen with garages that do exist, where maybe they are neglected or the storage that's inside the garage is spilling out and it's surrounding the garage, and then it becomes an eyesore and you get complaints from the neighbors, things like that. Snow removal isn't occurring, et cetera, because somebody's not living there.
So what exactly is council asking us to do?
The way that I worded it is that we are reviewing code to see if there is a solution to allow stand-alone garages or not. That's going to be up to Planning Commission to make that determination. The request, I mean, you read the email from Mr. Layton. He would like to see how this can happen for this particular constituent. So I think that is the request, is how do we look at our code in a way that's going to make the most people in the community happy?
So, looking at the Watertown thing here, when I was reading through it, it mentions about where you can and can't put stuff and what you can use the property for. And really, it's meant for storage inside that garage or that unit. And I guess we look at what's the purpose for the condo garages on the 210 bypass, or those garages, or the ones down one on Fir Avenue. That's what those are for storing stuff that we all have too much stuff. So, for a point of discussion, I guess, why, if that continues to potentially grow in that category, what is the purpose of this? Other than, I can see it if there's a home here and a vacant lot next to it, to what you said earlier, to utilize both of those pieces of property and let somebody do a garage on one side of that.
Why, then why does it have to be right next to it? The end result is there's a garage there.
Yeah.
What difference does it make if I live right next to it versus 3 blocks away?
So, I don't, I guess maybe I'm more skeptical about how people maintain things if it's not on their property.
Drive around town,
Yeah,
there are people that live in primary residence that don't maintain them.
I agree.
That's just a crutch to lean back on. You can find that in any community. Not a really valid reason to argue against something. It's really up to the individual. And that would go back to, I'd say, maybe enforce our current ordinances better.
I mean, I think to answer the council's question, based on how the ordinance is written, it can't be accommodated, and we can await further instruction from the council on what they want us to do. It's a simple question. I mean, is it okay to have standalone garages on single lots without a primary residence? I think if that's what they want, they can tell us how to get there.
Well, yeah, so what you're saying is, go back to the council and say, we need to know if you're looking for a broader opinion on this as a whole, or just, are you looking for this specific situation? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, and the situation isn't really ripely in front of us either. It's not here on an application. It's just a question, how would you interpret your ordinance to allow this? I think the answer would be it would not be allowed under our current ordinance. I don't think that's,
I think we could take the city council's directive more broadly, though, and consider something like what Mr. Cooney's suggesting. And I mean, we could turn around and propose to the council, if we were to go down this path, we would look to establish a new zoning district, and here would be the draft restrictions on that. And, we could even make the point to say, hey, we don't know how much these will proliferate, but if they were to, let's say, get out of hand, just like Watertown did, we could always pull it back. I mean, right now, we're hypothesizing what problems could occur without really knowing that there's going to be a problem, right?
Right, but like,
Yeah, I guess I would suggest that we don't, I don't think we should propose a rezoning based upon one city in South Dakota and what they did. I mean, I think we need to like do more work because our zoning districts have been in place for a long time.
Yep.
And it's not just something willy-nilly where like we have one constituent coming to the city saying, I want to build a garage. And we say, okay, we're going to create new zoning districts because of that. Like, because Watertown, South Dakota did and it worked for them, so we're going to do it too. I mean, I think that we need to like really think about it. And really make a, you know, a well thought out proposal to the council if that's where we're gonna go. I mean, I'm not saying I'm against creating a new zoning, but I just don't know if that's a knee-jerk reaction, if it's well thought out, and if it's what the majority of constituents want. I would like to hear from more people than just one person wanting to do this, of like what actual people of Fergus Falls think.
Well, to your point, I don't think Watertown has it figured out because they've already gone through one revision of it, right? I mean,
yeah, but Clara, you'd mentioned that they actually rolled back regulation on it, and that's the updated one you presented, right?
The specific thing that they rolled back was having to gather signatures from surrounding
Okay.
property owners because that, and I mean, that in and of itself kind of raises a red flag for me, because if you have a zoning practice that is being stopped by the neighborhood surrounding that zone,
Yeah.
People are
and then you
wanting it.
just take, yeah, and then you take that away, I don't know.
Yeah.
That seems like a questionable choice to have made, but again, we talked for just a few minutes, so
Yeah.
there may be more to it than that.
I totally understand. I understand this constituents want, and I think it's something that we should just explore more. I'm not saying that I'm against it, but I think that it's just something that we need to think about more. It's easy for people to say, I support something, when it's not right next door to you. And as we've seen at the planning commission level and really at, any level, when it affects you personally, you may have different thoughts. And I think we just need to think about if this was happening next door to us,
And I think just for maybe some further context on how this did end up in front of the council, and now ultimately in front of planning commission, is there is significant frustration on the behalf of this constituent, in that his family member purchased this lot specifically to build a garage, not realizing that the rules were that they would need to have a primary structure or at least be adjacent so that we could connect the two in some way. So there's some anger on the part of this constituent, so they reached out to their council member, and so that's how we're hearing about
Right.
this now.
So I get the statement like happened next door to you, but the party that lives next door to this vacant lot could buy it, build a garage, no problem. No questions asked. We just say, yep, that falls in line. So that kind of goes back to like, what difference does it make of who owns it? The end result is there's a garage there no matter what.
And that thought process, again, has been kind of like what Wayne was saying, the maintenance issue. There's the concern that if somebody doesn't live there, that it's not going to be maintained. But yes, I hear what you're saying.
So I think what we need to respond to the council with is, I mean, 'cause it sounds like you've already expressed this cannot happen currently under what we have.
Right, yep.
But I think we need to go a step beyond that and say, if you want to look at this further, here's a path we would recommend going down. Right? Don't we owe that to the council so they know what this is gonna be opening up?
Is there a history beyond what brought this up with others wanting to do what this person?
I mean, yeah, we get calls every once in a while about somebody saying, can I, this lot near me is for sale, can I put a garage on it? And we tell them the rules, and that either works for them or doesn't work for them.
So to answer the council's question, no, it would not be permitted. This specific request would not be permitted under our current zoning ordinances. However, we're willing to look at potential solutions or recommendations from the planning commission on whether or not we would.
I do like the thought of having more community members be able to weigh in on this and just get a better feel for how this might affect people or how they might be interested in it. The exact mechanism for how we do that could be debated. I mean, we could do like an open house and have people come comment that way. We could do some kind of a survey. But I like the idea of getting further input versus just one single constituent saying, this is what I want.
Yeah. I think that before we make any significant changes, especially creating a new zone, we want to make sure that it's something that's supported by the people of Fergus Falls, for sure. I think people don't like to come in person to things. I'm just speaking for myself, so I'd rather create a survey, I think, to have people give us their thoughts on if that could be easily disseminated. That would be, I think, the most efficient way to go about it.
So does it make sense to draft like a new zoning district language to put out there to gather input or feedback from the survey on? Or is that the direction that we want to go? Kind of back to Mr. Vukinich's point of, I think we need to signal to the council that, hey, we're going to be exploring the path of either conditional use permit or just a new zoning district in general with some potential overlay.
I think not putting together, I mean, I wouldn't, I feel like
Seems jumpy.
I feel like the average
person doesn't like to read legal.
they're maybe not going to necessarily see a difference between a conditional use permit process versus a zoning overlay. Well, how much would we have to explain in something like that?
I think we could create a survey that has common sense questions where we can communicate what we would potentially be proposing and whether or not they'd support it or not.
Yeah, I think some color around what we mean by garage would be helpful, because people could have a lot of different visions in their head about what that could be. So I think at minimum, setting some parameters around what type of garages would be envisioned under this new zone would be helpful.
Yeah. And what the permitted uses for those garages would be.
Yeah, I mean, just a simple, a garage, a maximum of this height, this much of the lot. And for residential use only, something like, or personal storage, no commercial use, just some broad parameters I think would be helpful.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think your knee-jerk's gonna be no. If you don't put a little definition around it.
So to that point, what do we think of what Watertown has done with their parameters for garages?
I think theirs was a minimum of 1 acre.
I think if
It
you look
was.
at the RS, though, the one Clara just handed out now, that's probably the one that we would
Yeah.
likely work off of. That's the one with
So, and that-
some of the
I did-
revised.
I did print off their requirements for that district. So, the minimum square foot area of a residential storage district would be 10,000 square feet. 100-foot wide, 40-foot front yard, 10-foot side yards, 15-foot rear, height of a building of 24 feet.
I'm sorry, you said that was minimum? No, that was maximum.
No, minimum. Minimum 10,000 square foot area.
So if you look
Quarter
on
acre.
prohibited uses, they have sheds on there, which probably relates to,
I don't know what the difference between the garage and the shed is.
That's a good question, but I don't know what the difference between number 1 and number 3 of theirs, and we're talking about prohibited uses or what you can use for it. 1 is non-residential uses, number 3 is residential dwelling uses, prohibited. So I don't know what they mean by non-residential uses, so,
Well, I think it's clear that, I think what it means is you can build this garage in a residential zoned district, but you can't live in it. Right?
And you can't use it as the place where you're conducting your business. So that would be, like, commercial use would be non-residential use.
uses.
Yeah, I mean, something that's one page like this, I don't think would be hard to digest for someone taking a survey.
They're not gonna take the time. People want,
Well, but I mean,
Yeah.
then what's the value of their opinion? Like, if they're not gonna take the time to
I mean,
consider the question.
I think we can create a survey that again gets, we can ask questions and provide information in a way that
Yeah, we can.
anyone can understand and easily answer.
Would we want to have a subcommittee?
I think so.
To help create that survey and maybe an outreach plan?
That's what I think would be a good idea. Anyone willing to serve on that subcommittee? Nate?
Yeah, I would.
I think it'd be helpful to, since you're probably the most familiar with
Yeah,
this zoning and
yep.
how it's worked.
I can work on it with Nate.
Okay?
We'll just say, I mean, like, having lived for several years in that community, this has not been detrimental to any one of those neighborhoods or have resulted in a lack of development in other areas of the community. So, I mean, it's quite literally just a good way to get more investment on underutilized property that would likely never serve as a decent investment for a primary use structure. So I just see such low risk here that it's, having been a part of the chamber that conducts some surveys and knowing how simplistic that we can make those and seeing the participation rate in that not being stellar amongst our members, I'm just skeptical that we're going to get much of a base as a result of the survey, and it's just going to continue to delay. So, I mean, I would like to see us almost adopt the language here, make our adjustments as needed to it, and send it to the council. They're the ones that are ultimately going to have to review it and make a final decision whether to say, send it back to us. Because we could put all the restrictions that we wanted to on it, and they could still strip all of it and then still pass it to council.
We could request that council hold an open hearing,
Right?
an open, whatever the term is. Which is protocol for some ordinance updates, not all, but like our DNR ordinance requires having a public hearing. So this could be similar.
So, I mean, is there any of the language in here that jumps out to anybody that's like, I don't like that, or we need to modify that, or like, what's the general consensus from the commission on this?
Do you maybe want to do a motion to set a subcommittee first, and then we can have a little further discussion?
Well, I guess, do we need the subcommittee if we take action on this tonight, though?
Sure, okay.
Clara, did you put together this memo on this issue? Okay, so you're summarizing what the ask was of the city council, right? Okay,
Yes,
so
based on,
what it says is that they asked for us to evaluate potential revisions. We're doing that. To determine if or how standalone garages may be permitted in residential zones. So how it can be done is through a CUP. We've talked about that.
Or rezoning.
Or a rezoning. Can we possibly get back to them with that? If that's what they asked for, we'd be willing to do that. We even have a zoning ordinance that Commissioner Kundi provided. We could just have maybe one more month to work this through. If we think that we need to do some sort of, community outreach in the meantime, we can do that. I'm sure some organizations would be interested to know that kind of the extent of this potentially is, any lot in town could have a garage on it. Maybe like Habitat for Humanity might want to know about that. And then we can kind of just, think about this a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't think I'm in a position to push a new zoning ordinance through tonight.
I have no appetite for that.
I think you guys need to do some voting. So would either of you, which one of you is putting a motion on the floor?
I'll move that we adopt the language in the RS and RG language and create a new zoning district and present that to council and have a open input session at council level.
Do we have a second? All right, motion fails for lack of a second. Do we have any other motions?
Did you just second?
Oh, you're,
She said lack of a second. Are you seconding, Mr.?
oh, no, I'm
Okay.
sorry, I'm sorry.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Motion fails for lack of a second. Do we have any other motions on the floor? Or that want to be made?
I mean, I'll move that we indicate to the council that there's a process we have to go through to, get this request approved, and that process is either establishing a new zoning district or conditional use permit process. Yeah, that would be one motion I would make.
Do we need to make that as a motion?
Maybe we don't.
I just needed to hear what
I-
the
I-
consensus
I-
was.
yeah.
Does anybody want to establish a subcommittee?
I think that'd be.
Do we want to pass a motion to establish a subcommittee or not?
Well-
I think that would be the other motion that we would.
I will say if the subcommittee is going to look through and draft language on a new district, then I will offer that motion to create the subcommittee to work through and draft language on that.
And I would second that motion.
I'm gonna let you guys vote, then I have one more thing to say.
Okay, we have any further discussion? So just to clarify, your motion is to establish a subcommittee to draft a proposed new zoning ordinance solely. Like that's what the subcommittee is established for.
Okay, maybe I should pop in. So, and the zoning ordinance is district overlay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. That is accurate.
Okay. Do we have a second? You have a
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Subcommittee, we will talk, or you may talk amongst yourselves.
The next item on the agenda is a conditional use permit process to allow pylon signs in B2 and B3 zoning districts.
I did not write a memo for this one, so I'll just tell you why this is necessary. I've had 2 requests now for projects in B2 zones that in the past or normally you would see a pylon sign as part of those builds. However, when going through the sign permit process, our sign code doesn't actually, our current and our new, doesn't actually reference pylon signs until the B5, B6 zones. So any business zone below from B1 until B3 does not have the option for including a pylon sign. So I think because they do exist and it makes sense for them to continue existing or being added into projects, I believe there should be a conditional use permit process that would allow for the placement of a pylon sign. In some B3 zones, which is, again, like our downtown, obviously there aren't large enough, some of those lots are not large enough for a pylon sign, but some lots are. And if we can have a process in place so that the neighbors are notified, maybe if there are conditions that need to be placed, we can place them, then that's a way that we can do it while allowing those businesses to have the signage that they need and want.
I'm sorry, could you define a pylon sign for me?
So, Shopko, that big sign that was in their parking lot that had the huge Shopko sign at the top, that's a pylon sign. So it's like it's the very tall ones.
So is there height restrictions
Sorry?
with,
Are there height restrictions?
yeah,
Yes, yes. We do have height restrictions that are related to pylon signs that we would have to include as part of the conditional use permit process.
So you're looking for a motion to
If you
establish.
if you think it makes sense, maybe I'm being too vague here. Okay, FM Bank are rebuilding a building. They took down the pylon sign that was there. My assumption is that used to be zoned differently, and when it was zoned as a B5, that it had a pylon sign. Now it's B3. There's another business in a B2 zone that's also looking at the same thing. B2, B3 in our sign ordinance language is considered essentially the same. They don't have an option for a pylon sign. So when I get a new sign permit application, I have nothing that I can go back to in the code and say, yep, check, no problem. So because that they have existed on those properties in the past, and it makes sense for them to continue existing on properties like that into the future, I think a conditional use permit makes sense.
And there's no grandfathering clause
No.
No,
if you take it down and want to put it back up again. Once it's down, it's,
down.
It's a new sign going up, and I have to approve it as such.
Does anybody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we establish a conditional use permit process for B1 through B3 for pylon signs.
I will second that motion.
All right. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So I'll just take that straight to council, just to be clear.
Next item on the agenda, battery storage regulations.
Okay. So the Port Authority was approached by a company out of Texas to either sell or lease some land for a battery storage project. Battery storage is not something that I'm super familiar with, but people who maybe work for energy companies could be. It is a technology that I think we will be seeing a lot more of in the future. And in fact, Otter Tail Power does have a certain number of battery storage facilities in their 5-year plan. It's behind their solar and wind energy build out, but it is still there. The city adopted solar zoning ordinances before the Hoot Lake solar project went forward. So this is kind of a similar thing, so that we're not just being super reactive, maybe we're being a little bit more proactive to when some of these projects might come forward. It's a long process to get one approved, but including language now in our ordinance, I think would be helpful moving forward so that we have a permit process in place, we have regulations in place, and when somebody comes to town and says, we're interested in this battery project, where can we put it? What are the regulations? We can just say, here you go, this is what's in our code. I included in your packet some just model language that a group out of New York State put together that seems to be, as far as I can tell from my research, kind of like the go-to for cities who are looking to implement some kind of zoning and regulations. Obviously, we would need to do some amending to make it fit Fergus Falls and our other zoning regulations, but it's at least a starting place. So tonight, I'm kind of just wondering, like, how do you want to move forward with this? Do you want to do this as a full group, just bringing forward options at planning commission meetings? Do you want to do subcommittee, or would you just like to see a version that's marked up by staff and kind of go from there?
I guess personally, I think it would be good to have city staff put together a proposed version and then bring it to planning commission. And if at that point we think that a subcommittee needs to be established to review that and further revise it,
Okay.
we could do that at that point. Otherwise, we could have, obviously further discussion at that time. And if we're ready to send it to council, we could do that as well at that time. But I think it would be good to start with a draft.
Yeah. Is anybody familiar with battery storage technology or regulations surrounding battery storage at this point in time? Mike's kind of like, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, my company does battery storage, but I'm usually involved on the legal side after it's in operation.
Okay.
So some of this is kind of in the development, permitting side of
Yes,
it.
very much so.
I do sometimes see battery storage and solar in the same ordinance. I know we have a solar ordinance, possibility to update that too.
Yeah.
There's another application too to consider, besides at the point of electricity generation, like a wind and solar. But you do, I believe, also see companies starting up where they site these energy storage facilities in communities. They purchase the power off the grid at a certain price, hold it, then they sell it back when the price is higher. And that's how they would, I mean, is that, Nate, how you understand it? So I think that might be what we're thinking about. I mean, that might be the Texas company here and what they're doing, if they're looking in town versus at a generator source. So,
So the port property that they were zeroing in on was adjacent to a Great River Energy substation. So they wanted to be right next to that.
yep.
That could also be Great River's contractor for meeting the Minnesota regulations, carbon-free, though, too.
Could be,
Yeah.
could be, yeah.
They indicated they were here of their own accord, but that could be possible.
Sure.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think, so I'll pull together things I think that we need to have locked down in order to have a good ordinance is definitions, dimensional standards, performance and design standards, safety and first responder standards, hey-o. And then decommissioning is also a big point of discussion in these conversations, especially from what I've seen at the Port Authority, because they asked a lot of questions about, well, what's your decommissioning plan? And they said, well, we'll do whatever your ordinance says, but we don't have an ordinance, so we couldn't offer that information. And then there are different kinds of, I mean, I haven't done a ton of research on this, just like some very cursory stuff, but I think the way that we could break it down is two different use types based on size, rather than like being strictly adjacent to a substation versus being attached to a solar project. Like if we do the based on the size, I think that makes it a little simpler. So I just want to make sure I'm going in the right direction and there's nothing that is jumping out at you as not a good fit for Fergus Falls or something that you really don't want to see in the zoning code. I don't know if you've had a chance to look through any of the information at this point, or if you have any comments.
A little bit, I mean, we're just gonna be able to follow Minnesota Fire Code.
Yeah.
So that's
Well-
the thing that we're gonna look back on. And I believe that the state fire marshal's office will be doing most of the inspections along with us.
Okay.
But that's,
Well, maybe we can work together then to write the first responder stuff. Cool. Okay. Well, if there's nothing,
Well, there can also be some complexities around putting out a fire at a battery plant, just because of the material that it uses. So it would be a good idea if the fire department and the company got together to talk about how that would happen.
That looks like in their plan, they do, I mean, in their model code, they do have a compliance plan that they would come up with, so.
Yeah, I will say, I found this model ordinance separate from the company. They sent me some language from a county in Colorado, but the stuff that they sent me really only scratched part of the regulations. It was like very specific to just the zoning, and we need to go a lot further than that since we don't have any language in our code. So that's how I found this New York State stuff, is just based on doing some research and seeing kind of where Colorado maybe pulled some of their stuff from, but yeah.
Is there a real deadline associated with working on this, or right now, this is just, let's do this so we're ready?
Let's do this so we're ready. At this point, the Port Authority did agree to enter into a letter of intent for the property, but there are still a lot of hurdles to get to a point where there could even be a project. So we're starting now because in talking with Randy Sinstlen at Otter Tail Power, it's probably better to be proactive than reactive.
All right.
So
Anything
just
else?
Research.
Awesome, thank you. Old business. Is there
Well,
anything?
I don't have anything. If you guys have anything, go for it.
Nothing? All right, we do have a special session of the Planning Commission on April 8th, 2025 at 5:15 to review 2 interim use permit applications. Otherwise, after that, we will meet at our regular scheduled meeting in May. So with that, I'll adjourn.
Thank you.
Great.